Today, we are digging into one of history's most absolutely stunning personal transformations. It's the story of a man who waded through rivers of blood to grab a throne, only to become one of the world's greatest champions for peace. So that's the big question, right? How does a man like that, forged in violence and ruthless ambition, do a complete 180 and change not only himself, but the entire world in the process? Well, let's get into it. First things first, to really get a handle on Ashoka, you have to understand the world he was born into. And let me tell you, the 3rd century BC was not a time for peace and love. It was an age defined by the sword. I mean, everywhere you looked, people were fighting. In the West, Alexander the Great's generals were busy tearing his massive empire to pieces. And over in India, this scene was dominated by the Nanda Empire, a colossal military machine that could supposedly put 250,000 soldiers on the field. Just imagine that. But out of the chaos that Alexander's brief invasion left behind, a new power began to rise. A man named Chandragupta Maurya, who just so happens to be Ashoka's grandfather, managed to topple the Nandas and build his own empire, the Mauryan Empire. And as you can see, he didn't just win, he created what would become the largest homegrown empire in Indian history, paving the way for his son, Bindusara, and, of course, for Ashoka himself. All right, so now let's zoom in on the man himself. Ashoka's path to power wasn't just handed to him, not at all. In fact, it was drenched in blood from the very beginning. You see, Ashoka was never supposed to be the emperor, not by a long shot. His mother wasn't royalty, just a commoner, which put him way down the list. His older brother, Susuma, he was the golden child, the one everyone expected to take the throne. As a young prince, Ashoka was good, really good, and got sent to run some faraway provinces, but he was always kept at arm's length from the real power. So, what happens when his father, the emperor, dies in 274 BC? Well, things don't go smoothly. The whole thing explodes into a brutal 4-year-long civil war. Ashoka, refusing to be pushed aside, moves fast. He marches on the capital, takes on his own brothers, and wins. Let's be clear, this was a man who knew how to take what he wanted using pure brute force. So now he's emperor, and Ashoka keeps doing what his family always did, conquer. But one war, one single bloody campaign, was about to completely shatter his entire worldview. And, believe it or not, change the course of history forever. 8 years into his reign, Ashoka decides he wants Kalinga, a rich kingdom on India's east coast. He probably figured it'd be another quick victory, another notch on his belt, but what he got was a horrifying, bloody slog against an enemy that refused to give up. The final battle, it was a complete bloodbath. 100,000 people were killed in the fighting. Just let that number sink in for a second. Another 150,000 were captured and hauled away from their homes. And who knows how many more died later from starvation and disease. The scale of the carnage was it's hard to even wrap your head around. But here's the wild part. Standing on that battlefield, surrounded by all that death, Ashoka didn't feel victorious. He felt horrified. And then he did something that no conqueror back then ever did. He publicly admitted his regret. He basically said, as you can see here, that the suffering he caused was deeply, deeply regrettable. For a king in that era, that was a radical, almost unbelievable thing to say out loud. The man who walked off the battlefield of Kalinga was not the same man who had marched onto it. He was done with violent conquest. From that moment on, he embraced a totally new way of thinking about how to rule. And, the change was total. Look at this. The guy who used to love going on these big royal pleasure hunts, now he's making holy pilgrimages. The conqueror of land now dedicated himself to what he called the conquest of right. His entire focus just flipped, from military might to public well-being and morality. And at the heart of this new philosophy was this idea he called dharma. Now, this wasn't about forcing one single religion on his huge, diverse empire. Not at all. Think of it more like a universal moral code, a set of guidelines for everyone on how to live a good, decent life based on compassion and nonviolence. So what did this dharma look like in real life? Well, it was all about basic human decency. Nonviolence to all living things, respecting your parents and teachers, being kind to everyone, from holy men to your own servants. And it meant being generous to the poor and the elderly. And, get this, because it was truly ahead of its time, it demanded religious tolerance. Ashoka actually said that when you harm someone else's religion, you're really just harming your own. And look, This wasn't just some nice idea he had. He actually did stuff. He put the empire's money and manpower behind it. He ordered his people to plant shade trees along roads, grow mango groves so people had food, and dig wells so travelers wouldn't go thirsty. He even announced that anyone with any problem could come see him anytime, no matter what he was doing. It all comes down to this one incredible line he had carved in stone for everyone to see. The finest conquest is the conquest of right and not might. He completely redefined what it meant to win. Victory wasn't about swords anymore, it was about virtue and compassion. Okay, so Ashoka's personal transformation, it ended up having these huge ripple effects across the globe. He might have given up conquering with armies, but he was about to launch a whole new kind of campaign, one of peace. See, Ashoka had become a follower of the Buddha's teachings. So in 253 BC, he called this big meeting, the Third Buddhist Council. And out of it came this wild decision, to launch missions to spread the message of peace. And as you can see, this wasn't a small effort. He sent missionaries everywhere, to the Greek kingdoms in the west, all the way to North Africa, and of course to neighbors like Sri Lanka and Burma. And it worked. His own son, Mahendra, went to Sri Lanka and converted the king there, a huge success. But that was just the spark. Over the next few centuries, the seeds that Ashoka planted traveled along the famous Silk Road. And that's how Buddhism went from a local Indian faith to one of the great world religions we know today. But here's the twist. When Ashoka died after a long reign, his actual physical empire, the one he fought so hard for, it didn't even last 50 years. It just crumbled. But his real empire, the empire of ideas he built, that was just getting started. Which brings us back to our final question. The famous writer H.G. Wells once wrote that, among all the kings and emperors of history, Ashoka shines and shines brightly like a bright star. Why? Out of all the powerful conquerors, why does his legacy shine so bright when so many others have been forgotten? I think the answer is simple but powerful. He completely changed what it means to be strong. He proved that a ruler's greatest legacy isn't measured by the size of their army or the amount of land they conquer. It's found in the compassion they show and the values they champion. And that is the incredible lesson of Ashoka the Great, the emperor whose greatest conquest was conquering himself.